into this, I think it's always helpful to start with a definition. Now, every Wednesday morning, and any of you can email me, can call the office, can say, hey, I'd love to be a part of this. But at 10 a.m. every Wednesday morning, via Zoom, a bunch of us get together to just kind of talk through what we're dealing with on a Sunday morning, work through reflection notes, way to go deeper into what we're getting into. And one of the things that was said kind of toward the end of our time together, right? So we've already gone through a message on a Sunday morning. We then have gone through 50 minutes of sharing together. And then these words were offered. Now, I'm still not sure what you mean by rationalizing. And I thought, shoot, I usually know well enough to start with a definition. So can't do anything about last week. Let's start with a definition today, okay? Here's our working definition for procrastination. Procrastination is the decision to do nothing when we really should do something. Procrastination is the decision, meaning, it's a choice that we consciously make, the decision to do nothing when we really should do something. In the book of Proverbs, and it's kind of cool some of the things we find there in terms of how they're worded, but in the book of Proverbs, the term that Solomon uses for this kind of thing, one who procrastinates, the word he uses is this, sluggard. And we find that in Proverbs 24, verses 30 through 34. If you want to follow along, Proverbs 24, 30 through 34. Here's what we find in this passage. Proverbs 24:30. He writes, I went past the field of a sluggard, past the vineyard of someone who has no sense. Thorns had come up everywhere. The ground was covered with weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins. Verse 32. I applied my heart to what I observed. I love how he puts that. I applied my heart to what I observed, simply meaning, I tried to understand what I was seeing. I applied my heart to what I observed and learned a lesson from what I saw. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. And by that he means a little procrastinating, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. And the best way to think of these words, poverty or scarcity, as he's using them here, really no grapes in the vineyard, if you will. What that image points us to more than anything else is this, a person who is making a conscious decision, again, to do nothing when they know they need to do something. Now, if we know what procrastination is, you got the definition, right? If we know what it is, if we also know it is something to be avoided, right? Not a good thing. If that's the case, then why is it that sometimes we get caught in it? I think the answer to that often centers around one of three things. See if you connect to this as we think about these three things. For example, sometimes I think it's fear that gets in our way here, right? Certain things we know we need to do, and yet we procrastinate doing them because of fear, and more specifically, fear of failure. This may sound a little bit too sappy, but have any of you failed at anything you never tried to do? Sorry, I even said that out loud. I think that's too sappy. You can't fail at something you push aside, right? And say, I'm going to just put that off a little bit. I think fear of failure sometimes gets in our way, and we're even kind of thinking, I want to do this. I know I need to do this, but man, I don't want to look like a fool. I don't want to fail at this. At other times, I think it's perfectionism. Maybe we'll think of that as on the other end of the spectrum. But sometimes I think it's perfectionism that gets in our way. Some people, I think, fail to act. They put off certain things over and over again. They do that because even though they know they can do it well, they're not worried about total failure. they got to do it perfectly, and they feel like they're not quite there yet. So again, instead of taking on what they know they need to do, they just push it aside. And so sometimes I think it's fear of failure. Sometimes I think perfectionism kind of stops us in our tracks. But then I think this can also be a problem, and I think it can be a problem for all of us. I mean, talk about something we got to watch out for. I think another thing that can lead us to procrastinate is this, just the high value we place on personal comfort. You know, some of us would say, hey, when it comes to all the things I value, boy, there are a lot of good things that, you know, I prioritize in my life. I value, a lot of my values are just like Jesus's, but boy, they're going to start at the second place, because the first place is, I want to enjoy, you know, I want to be comfortable. I want to kick back most of the time. High value we often place on personal comfort can get in our way here, because, think about this, if hard work is required of us in order to be who God would have us be, if that hard work, if that effort is going to push us out of our comfort zone from time to time, if that's the case, and it is, then more often than not, man, we're going to choose comfortable over faithful. We're going to choose status quo over change. Or maybe think of it this way. You know, if our spiritual journey, if this journey of ascent grabbed onto rightly pushes us even a little bit, then most days, I mean, we are going to choose procrastination instead of simply doing what? That which we know we need to do. Guys, understanding all of that, here's what we want to do today. We want to take a look at some things that can help us with this, that can help us to move beyond procrastinating. And while this list certainly is not complete, it's not exhaustive, you know, there are so many other things that can help us with this. And I say that in part to say, please spend some time today, this week, thinking about this and saying, what else can help me personally when it comes to not putting things off? There'll be some things you'll name. They'll come to your heart with God's help. Not talking about today. Grab onto those as well. But I want to run us through 5 today, because I think these are things that can really help us the most. So consider these 5 things today. Things that we need to do in order to, again, push past procrastinating. Here's the first. First, if we want to get beyond procrastinating, first we've got to do this. We got to try to figure out where procrastination is currently hurting us the most. First step. Where is it most getting in our way right now? And while this will be a moving target for us, it'll be a moving target as we move into different seasons of life, you know, as we approach, you know, old age, right? We hit 30 and now all of a sudden things look different, you know, different seasons of life, different circumstances that we face, sometimes incredibly joyful circumstances, you know, get married, have children, other times facing great challenges. You know, while this will be a moving target for all of us, here's where it's getting in my way the most. We still have to make sure in this moment we can nail down, where am I right now? Where is this most getting in my way right now? Or if you want to use this old-fashioned word that I still think is kind of fun, every single moment we've got to be able to be aware of where we're being a sluggard, right? Now, this might sound incredibly simple. I think it's important to say this sometimes. You may say, that's kind of obvious. Want to work on procrastination? Of course we need to figure out where we're dealing with that, right? Problem with obvious, problem with simple, is when we think that way, immediately we might also think, I guess I can skip that step. You know, let me just think about it for 60 seconds and I'll come up with something. Especially because this may feel so darn simple, so obvious. Take some time today, this week, and really go deeper into this, you know, saying just just prayerfully, God, where is this hitting me most? What are different areas of my life? Where is this getting in my way? We can't work on procrastination unless we can say, here's where it's hurting me most. So first thing, today, this week, just ask yourself, what's your biggest hurdle right now when it comes to this? Or what are your biggest hurdles right now, plural, when it comes to this? Here's the second thing we've got to do in order to move beyond procrastinating. Second thing we got to do is this. We've got to develop within us a holy discontent, if you will, when it comes to the things we're putting off, right? Things we know we need to do, we're not doing them. We got to develop within us this angst, this dissatisfaction, this deep frustration when it comes to the ways we're not growing and we know we should be growing. You know, it's one thing to say, okay, here's where I'm procrastinating, right? I just want to admit that. I want to nail that down. And then we realize it doesn't bother us a bit, right? And all that's going to be is something that demotivates us. So a second thing, is there dissatisfaction within you? If not, what's the deal? You know, how can we begin to look at that more deeply? It's got to be there. In the book of Psalms, and we mentioned this last week toward the end, but in the book of Psalms, there is a section called the Songs of Ascent, kind of a beautiful part of the story of God's people as they were ascending to the temple to offer their sacrifices. When they were in the midst of that journey of ascent, they'd sing songs, right? Songs that reminded them kind of who they were. Again, as an aside, when I mentioned to you a moment ago, man, go to beamer.org, listen in, sing along to some of the stuff we do on Sunday mornings as a way of singing as you begin your journey of ascent on any given day. But these were songs that they would sing. We have them starting with Psalm 120 and moving through Psalm 134. But within 5 or 6 verses of this section of Psalms, here's what we find. We find the writer clearly feeling whole lot of discontent when it comes to his own life. Here's Psalm 120 verses 5 and 6. David writes this, "Woe to me that I dwell in Meshach, that I live among the tents of Kedar. Too long have I lived among those who hate peace." Now, a little bit of historical background can be helpful. Meshach was a nation that was north of Israel. Kedar was a nation that was southeast of Israel, and both of these nations were known as nations who were always ready and willing to go to war. And so when the psalmist, when David says, and he's speaking metaphorically here, but when he says, "Woe to me when I dwell among people," in essence, who pull me in a direction I do not want to go, when he says that, what he's simply pointing us to is this, how frustrated he is with his own unwillingness to change. With that in mind as well today, secondly, ask yourself this, as you look at those areas in your own life where growth is needed, but it's not happening. As you look at those areas in your own life where you know there are things you need to do, and man, you are avoiding them. As you look at your own life in that way, is there a measure of holy discontent churning within you? Because if not, and I know you know this, but let me say it anyway, if not, if it does not bother you that you are pushing some of these important things aside, even though you know they're important, if that doesn't bother you, then it's going to be hard for you to ever truly change. Make sense? And so begin to process that today and this week as well. You know, perhaps, why doesn't this bother me? You know, and what's it going to take for me to begin to feel a little bit more discomfort when I set aside the most important things in my life? Now, speaking of those most important things, here's a third thought. Thirdly, if we want to stop procrastinating, and another thing we've got to do is this. Every single day, we got to try to stay focused on what most matters in our lives. Every single day, as we think about the things it takes to follow Christ faithfully, as we think about those things that are most important in our walk with God, every single day we got to figure out how we can just stay focused on those most important things. Now here's why I say that. Here's why this is important. I'm not sure if you've thought of it this way before, but oftentimes we literally use really, really unimportant things so that we don't have to take on the important things. Or let me say it this way. Oftentimes we literally take busyness. I love seeing a few smiles because this is a strategy that we all engage at times. Maybe we've never labeled it enough. Oftentimes we literally use busyness as a way of helping us to procrastinate. And here's how that works. We have something we know we need to do. We have something that's important. It'll lead us to the bright future God wants for us. We have something that we understand fully. Most important thing right now in my journey. And yet in order to not do it, we do this instead. We fill up our schedule with things that are hardly important at all. And the brilliance of this plan is this. We can now say to ourselves, kind of guilt-free, or we can even say to God, not really feeling too bad, oh my goodness, God, this is an important thing to me as well. I know I need to do this and I want to, but I think you understand, looking at my schedule, God, I can't do it right now because I got too much going on. You've been there, haven't you? In the end, only way to beat that kind of procrastinating is to stay focused each day on what matters most, or is to make sure, might even say calendar-wise, to-do list-wise. These are the things, the important things, or priorities for us. Now, that does not mean we can't ever have fun. We got to do some things that we would say aren't that important, right? Doesn't mean we can't ever have fun. Simply means these things that we've got to take on, the hard work we've got to do in our journey of ascent, those things have just got to take priority over the other, or what's going to happen? They'll get lost in the shuffle. Someone once wrote, and I think it applies here, they wrote this. I hope you can track this. Probably should add this on the screen, but I love how they word this. Hard work is often the easy work you do not do at the proper time, right? Meaning, if you don't wait to write your paper, some of you still in school, right? If you don't wait to write your paper on the night before it's due, right? It's a lot easier, right? So for all of us, when we think about our journey of faith, hard work is often the easy work you do not do at the proper time. With that in mind as well today, ask yourself thirdly, when it comes to your spiritual growth, when it comes to your walk with Christ, when it comes to that, are you consistently staying focused on the things that matter most? Or are you consistently staying focused on the things that really are most important? And not just to God, but to you. Here's something else that can help us to not put things off. And this may be one of the most significant things that we find here. Fourthly, if we want to stop procrastinating, we've also got to do this. We've got to regularly seek out accountability, hear this, that creates some consequences for us. And I want you to notice how I've phrased that, because this is really important. We've got to seek out accountability, but not just any accountability. Instead, it's got to be accountability that brings some very real consequences to our lives. And let me say more about that. While all of us, I think, are somewhat inwardly motivated, different people, as we gather, we might be more or less. While I think, though, all of us are somewhat inwardly motivated, man, it is often that external influence, that outside influence, that can often be what it takes, though, to kind of break procrastination's hold on us better than anything at times. And yet that's only the case if that influence, that relationship is something that's got some teeth to it, is something that we can't just kind of easily push aside. A story is told of a pig who ate his fill of acorns under an oak tree, and then he started rooting around at the tree's roots. A crow remarked, you shouldn't do that. If you lay bare the roots, the tree is going to wither and die. Let it die, said the pig. Who cares if the tree dies as long as there are acorns for me? I'm afraid often that's how we think. It's kind of that, who cares if I kind of put off doing the things I need to do as a follower of Jesus Christ as long as my faith is strong, right? They go together, don't they? Who cares if I put off doing those things that can really strengthen me on this journey of ascent, really embrace the life God wants for me, the future God wants for me? Who cares if I put those things off as long as my future is going to be bright, right? Not how it works, is it? Truth is, there are always going to be consequences for our actions, and when we forget that, or even when we intentionally ignore that, it's in this moment, those moments, that we especially need some people around us who can hold us accountable. I want you to think back to the Israelites for a moment. These people who were required to embrace this uphill journey to Jerusalem each and every year. Guys, we are kidding ourselves if we think that all of them, every year, were excited about the journey, right? Right? I know we don't have this in the passages we'll look at, but it's human nature. We can place ourselves in there and say, no doubt, every single year when the journey came around, what was happening, some of them were saying even, can we put this off for another 6 months? What's the big deal? How would that be a problem with God? Can we maybe just start doing this every other year? Why would that be a problem? Guys, knowing human nature-wise, that some of them, maybe many of them, felt that way periodically. Question is, why did they engage the journey anyway? For this reason, because of the accountability they felt to the people around them, and because of the consequences they would have experienced had they said, hey, just go without me. Some of that consequence being, some of those around them needed their encouragement in the journey. Again, not just accountability, but consequences. I want you to think back to these words from Psalm 122, verse 1. These might be familiar words to all of us, but I'm not quite sure we always pull this meaning out of it. I think it's so helpful. I put this in this week's email. Again, if you don't normally get my Friday email, let us know. We'd love to get that to you. But hear these words again. Psalm 122, verse 1. I rejoiced with those who said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. How many times do you hear that and you think, yep, it's important to worship, right? I want to give you a little different slant here. I rejoiced with those who said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Guys, here's another really important thing to take away from that. This understanding that it is so much easier to not put off doing important things like that when we have other people around us who are saying, hey, let's go do this together, right? Whether it's worship, whether it's study, whether it's prayer, whether it's serving. One of the things to pull out of those words, let us go to the house of the Lord, is this great reminder. Harder to put the important things off when we're walking together, when there are people around us who are saying, let's go. Guys, with that in mind as well today, just ask yourself, do you have that kind of influence in your life right now? Do you have some relationships that do bring some accountability along with them? And not just any accountability, but accountability instead that really does bring with it some consequences. Now, lest you email me later and say, How did the consequences work with the accountability again? Let me just say this then. Imagine having a conversation with someone in your life. You've got a friend. You have someone you connect to on a regular basis. Every couple of weeks, you talk in person, on the phone. You share about your spiritual journey. Every couple of weeks, you say to one another, I just got to tell you, I really want to do this, and I'm putting it off, Not good. I don't like that. Pray for me. 2 weeks later, get together again and you say, hey, you know what? I just want to let you know, just as we share our faith, got this thing I really want to do. I keep putting it off, right? We can do that month after month. That's not accountability with consequence. Maybe it's kind of accountability. Accountability with consequence is that friend when you get to the second meeting who says, okay, when we talk again, you better tell me about at least one step you've taken toward what you know you're wanting to do. Accountability with some consequence again. Do you have that in your life? And then the last thing we need to do if we're going to be able to push away procrastinating. And as obvious as the first thing was, got to figure out where it's hurting us. This one's going to sound obvious as well. But don't let that cause you to push this aside, because this now is the critical step as we move into today, as we move into this week. Lastly, if we want to move beyond procrastinating, we got to do this. We got to just start somewhere in order to work on this. Man, if you're anything like me, there are so many things that come to mind when we think, how do I need to change in this life? If you're like me, there are so many things that can come to mind when we begin to think, okay, what am I not doing that I should be doing to come back to our destination? In the midst of that flood of things, the challenge can become, we don't ever start doing anything because the mountain seems too steep, right? Know that always when we feel like that, we have a God who's simply hoping this. We'll just start somewhere. We'll just take one step, right? Guys, the bottom line is this. God wants every single one of us not just embracing some kind of journey with Christ, but being willing to embrace a journey of ascent. And if in fact a journey of 1,000 miles, as the saying goes, starts with a single step, guys, make your single step today, make your single step this week, and make it a step that begins to take you beyond procrastinating. Let me close this with this thought from Richard Evans. He writes, the tragedy of life is not that it ends so soon, but that we wait so long to begin it. For all of us as followers of Christ, here's to no more putting things off.